Hey babies, you done it. The show is up. It's running and you have nothing to do. Welcome to the world of being a director. You have gone from the most important person in the rehearsal to the person that everybody looks up to that's trying to figure out what's going on, to somebody who is totally useless. You are the appendix of the show. Literally, you could be there or not. And in most professional situations, to be honest, once opening night has happened, and a lot of times even opening night, I've directed several shows that I never saw the show in production. Once we got through tech rehearsals, because you are literally have nothing to do with the show, I was gone. Now, a lot of educational opportunities, if you're in theater in college or in high school, obviously you're still going to be around. You're still probably going to be given notes. A lot of shows, ideally, again, as we've talked about things in the past, hopefully your actors have been off book for a couple of weeks by opening night. But I have been a part of, and I'm sure everybody in this room has been a part of, a play that there were people that weren't off book during the show on closing night. So, not to name names. But it happens. There are actors who are more or less studious. Again, it is not the ideal. I've tried to describe in this class the way it should work ideally. Again, as a director, it is your show. You have the ability to recast, to cut people, to get rid of people. But again, how much damage you're going to do in the course of that is a question. So sometimes you have to just put up with what you have to put up with. You may have an older actor who just can't remember their lines, and so you come up with quaint ways of having that happen by putting lines inside of magazines or having cue cards placed about the stage, that sort of thing. It's just you deal. So, but inevitably, when opening night comes, you're there for support. You're there for to make sure that everybody is happy and healthy. The pressure of an audience can sometimes, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm not going to name names, but if they're watching, they know who they are and what they did. One of my favorite actors that we ever had at AUM was this young gentleman who was one of the best actors we ever had, but for whatever reason, he was totally freaked out whenever the person who reviewed the plays came to see the play. And the person who reviewed the play had a very distinctive laugh. And so as soon as something funny happened in the play, the actor, I would avoid telling the actor that the reviewer was in the audience because he didn't always make opening night. But as soon as something funny happened, he knew that guy was out there and he froze. He would freeze. He would get stiff and it would start sweating. And he just knew that this guy was going to rake him over the coals in the newspaper, which he usually did because he usually didn't see a very good performance from this guy because he was intimidated by him because he knew that he was going to write bad things about him, and it came to fruition, which is unfortunate for both the actor and the reviewer because the reviewer and I had a conversation. I said, "You've never seen this guy perform the way he's able to because he always freezes up when you're in the audience." And his response was, "I got to review what I see," which I understand. But at any rate, I also had an instance where we'd gone through dress rehearsals. Everything was fine. The costumes fit perfectly. It was a high-end kind of play where everybody's dressed to the nines for a party scene, and everybody was happy. And we got through the first dress, second dress, went through a preview, and the night of opening night, one of the actresses refused to go on because she didn't like the costume because she felt it made her look fat. Now, she was skinny as a rail, but I promise you, we spent all day long trying to deal with that issue, and it was merely because she was scared of opening night, and she put that fear into blaming the dress for whatever. And of course, once the show started and once she got comfortable on stage, it went fine. But there are going to be a lot of people who are intimidated or pressured by that opening night feeling. Now, that's why it's nice to have had at least a preview audience or two or 10, so that the actors get accustomed to the audience reactions so they can adjust, because again, that's one of the things that's going to happen, is that your actors, and again, being live theater, there are going to be things that happen. Things are never going to work perfectly. And so you have to make sure your actors are aware that what's called holding for a laugh, or the peak of the applause, if there's a musical number, for instance, and the end of the applause of the musical number, there's sort of a crescendo where the play needs to continue, and you don't need to add 10 minutes to the play just because of the applause or the laughter. But I've been involved in plays where suddenly the audience we did a production of Noises Off, which by God ran 2 hours, every rehearsal, and then we got an audience and it ran 2:15, and it was a solid 2:15. It's just that it added 15 minutes of solid laughter, and you can't speak when the audience is rolling. So it happens. The audience will have an impact on the play, and you can still be there to support, to encourage your actors to participate, to remain consistent to the role that they have created. Now, let's talk a little bit more about reviews. Reviews are, if you're in a large enough environment where you're going to have a reviewer who is actually going to publish things in a paper. For instance, in Chicago, there are generally, I'd say, a half dozen to a dozen reviews of everything that's done, because there are that many different newspapers who are looking for readership and want to encourage or discourage in some cases. They have this thing called the Jeff Committee that every year gives annual awards in Chicago, like the Tony Award in New York. And they have this committee that has to have it, I think it's 3 members of the committee see every single show in Chicago. It's a commitment that they make to be a part of the Jeff Committee. And then those 3 people can either recommend or not recommend the show for the audiences in Chicago to see. And so that is an additional onus that isn't necessarily a part of many theater communities, because you're not having to, the number of people who attend the show isn't determined by 3 people who may be part of an audience one night. And so, nor is it usually subjected to having a critic who is splashing people's names and pictures all over the papers. Dealing with, well, let's talk about bad reviews first. First of all, as the director, I want to encourage you to have the chutzpah, that's what I'm going to call it, have the cojones, have the moral authority to say that whatever's on stage is your responsibility. And therefore, whatever is belittled or called weak, it may be specific to an actor or to a prop or to something that is talked bad about. And because you are the director of the show and you didn't change it, I would take responsibility for that, and that can then take a lot of the pressure off the actor or the designer or whoever else got the bad review. Just take the bad review upon yourself. It's water off a duck's back. 90% of people are, I can tell you from, again, personal experience, a lot of times when you get a bad review, you're going to get audience members who are going to come see the show and say, you know, the show wasn't that bad. Now, without the bad review, they may have thought different. But again, a bad review can, in some ways, be a positive thing. But you need to be aware of people's egos, of the way that people react to bad reviews. It can be crushing, like I said about this actor who never performed to his level when the critic was in the audience. So again, there are things that if you're around, you can still have an impact on. And because you are the voice of the play, and because the actors trust you and trusted you with this play, they will trust your reaction to the review. Now, having said that, well, just because it's fun, here's a little video about what to do with bad reviews.
See, I've gotten many bad reviews. In fact, I'm in shock when I open a review and it's a good review.
I've never had a bad review. My mother writes all of mine.
I was once in a movie called The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. It got terrible reviews, and it made so little money, now I have to send them residuals.
I never read any reviews because when they're bad, they hurt too much, and when they're good, They're never quite good enough.
They'll say hateful things about me, and I'll get hurt and offended, but then I'll go, hey, they're talking about me.
No, I don't read reviews. They hurt my feelings. Even if they're good ones, I find something terrible about them. And then I think, I don't care what you think, bloggers, so cut it out.
One time, I got a review. This was one of my favorite bad reviews. They said, Gilbert Gottfried is the worst thing to happen to show business since the snuff film.
When I get a bad review, I cope by thinking about the show Seinfeld, which got terrible reviews. And now that show has made him so much money, he can afford to buy his childhood home, Brooklyn.
With reviewers, if they badmouth someone else, rip them apart and destroy them, they should be allowed, and it's free speech. If they talk about me, they're being quite cruel.
All right, Lord love Gilbert Gottfried. Anyway, the problem with bad reviews is that they sort of blindside you often because a lot of times you're not prepared for a bad review. The problem with good reviews is you think a good review is going to be a good thing. And oftentimes it is. Oftentimes a good review can sell tickets and get an audience there and get the actors involved and excited. The problem with good reviews, and this is what blindsides you, is that oftentimes actors who you have encouraged not to believe their bad review, will suddenly take a good review to heart and suddenly think that they are, I don't know, more important or bigger than the show. And again, the saying goes, there are no small parts, just small actors. And what that means is that every play, no matter if it's Hamlet or if it's Five Guys Named Mo, which is a true ensemble piece, every piece really is an ensemble piece. It is we, us, the designers, the director, the technicians, the crew, everybody is telling that story. And if you have a spot operator that's doing crazy stuff, lighting, can't find the right actor, the show suffers, yes? And so the fact that a good actor or a good performance may have been pointed out in a good review, oftentimes they tend to get this attitude like, I am better than the rest of everyone else, and that can get dangerous. Because then they start belittling others, talking down to people, not treating people as equals. And the truth of the matter is, we're all just people, yes? It is a problem with people who are what I'm going to call famous, that because people see them, I have a very good friend who was a nighttime broadcaster at the local NBC station. And because every night when people got home, they turned on the news and saw him giving the news, they have this sense that they know who's this guy. And so when we'll be at a restaurant, people will come up to him and just talk to him like he's their bud. And they'll walk out and say, who is that? And they'll say, I have no idea. But because he is recognizable and people feel like they know because they invite him into their homes every night for the news, he has a certain level of fame within our community. And people think that they know those people. If you have a famous actor, a famous television star. Susan Lucci has this famous story of people attacking her because they thought that she was so evil. Well, it was Erica Kane, her character, that was evil. Susan Lucci didn't get divorced 7 times and have 16 children or whatever Erica Kane had. And so she would be confronted by audience members, fans of the show outside the studio, and blamed for all the sinister things that her character was doing. Well, that's not her. That is her character. And a lot of times people in the public have a hard time separating one from the other. And so there are Michael C. Hall, who many of you may have seen 6 Feet Under, is notoriously a very quiet, my wife and I know him from the Texas Shakespeare Festival, and he is very introverted as a person, but of course very extroverted as a character on that show. And he is someone who, when we hang around with him, not that we hang around often, but the times we have gone out after a show or did something with him, he is intimidated to the 9th degree by people coming up and approaching him. But they recognize him from the show. And so they feel like they can approach him and cross that barrier that most people have when they come into contact with people that they are unfamiliar with. Anyway, so as a director, again, bad reviews, it's easy to know what to do. You need to go talk to the person who got the bad reviews, or be supportive of cast members, or be supportive of the play. But good reviews, oftentimes it's not so easy to see where the little burr is going to start developing, or where the seed's going to start growing into this canker. And so again, keeping your pulse on the cast, and all of these things we're going to talk about today, really your trust in the stage management has got to be paramount. This is going to show the proof of that relationship over time. This is why the stage manager needs to be the stage manager doesn't make the decisions. It's your decisions to make as far as character development, all those sort of things. But the stage manager needs to be included in the process so that they can pass that down. As you leave and they're trying to maintain the artistic integrity of the show, the stage manager needs to understand why the choices were made so that they can explain to the actor, especially if there's going to be a replacement or somebody come in to fill in, or there's an understudy that goes on that may not have been a part of the entire production process up to that. The stage manager is going to have to be the person who deals with that person. Yes? If there are what I'm going to call improvements, yes? Suddenly actors get on stage and start getting laughs where they were unexpected, or where they are playing to the audience, or things that are not a part of the presentation as you as the director had hoped. You need to nip them in the bud. Let the actors know the stage manager has full responsibility to maintain that order as well. Be persistent. Sometimes an actor, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you're the one that's constantly saying, don't do that, or let's say somebody was supposed to wear a hat in the show and they decide that they don't like the hat, so they stop wearing the hat. You can't, in equity situations you could fine them. But ultimately they may be willing to pay the fine. But if every day you and the stage manager are persistent on wear the hat, sometimes actors will just say, okay, I'll wear the hat, because they're tired of hearing about it. So persistence, there's something about, the ocean and the river, can pound the rocks and change the shape of the rock, even though the rock's a lot harder than the water, because the water is persistent, yes? Again, I would inform producers as a last resort if there are problems, but ultimately the producer is there and is paying the check or dealing with people. And again, hopefully you have understudies, which we talked about before, that you can go to in the case of extreme problems. But ultimately you've got to rely on the actor's professionalism. And sometimes that doesn't exist. So you just mark that down to next time I don't deal with that person, no matter how good they may be. If there are problems that arise between the cast and the crew, or between cast members, that sort of thing, that's natural, especially in long runs. In a 2-week run, you can avoid each other if you need to. But in long runs, extended runs, if you're on tour with one another and really can't get away from each other, again, stage management can help with this. But as a director, it's often nice to know where the potential problems exist. And it's not just problems in the sense that people don't get along. Sometimes it's problems in the sense that people do get along, because relationships happen. People fall in and out of love. And especially if you're on a year-long tour, that may happen, 2 or 3 times in the course of the tour. And you may have people that literally can't stand talking to one another. Again, Noises Off as an example of a show that works on stage, but also shows the backstage life as an excellent example of things like that are going on. You should never, again, in any kind of conflict like that, you should never take sides. Always be the sounding board. Listen. But I would never pick a side, because as soon as you pick a side, the resolution is going to come and you're going to be the odd man out. Again, treat people as people. Don't be high-minded with anyone or high-handed. Again, you never know, especially in the college theater situation. I've had again, I'm just going to use Octavia Spencer as an example. The first year I was here, Octavia Spencer was one of my students, and the only thing she ever did for us at AUM was work backstage. She was the person that swept and mopped the floor. And today she's a major Broadway, Oscar-winning actress. So you never know who the people are going to become someday. You may be speaking to the next Octavia Spencer when you're talking to some crew member backstage. So just beware. People, they grow in their positions and change, and they'll remember you one way or the other. All right, there are a couple people that you're going to have to deal with. again, maybe not so much you if you've left, but there's going to be people like the box office manager. The box office manager is the person who's obviously responsible for ticket sales. As a director, I often like to know how many people are in the crowd that night, especially if you're doing a comedy. There's just a certain level of involvement in comedies. I have found that if you have more than a 50% house in comedies, the laughter gets to be contagious. If you have less than 50% of attendance in a comedy, a lot of times the pressure of the empty environment can overwhelm an audience and douse the laughter. So the audience will enjoy the show as much, it's just that they're not as responsive. Sunday matinees, again, not to talk bad about any one person or any one group, but Sunday matinees tend to be a little older, they tend to be a little deafer, they tend to be people who they will describe the action of the show to their person who's sitting next to them if they're not quite up to date. They do it rather loudly. They will also tend to unwrap candies and mints and things during the show, which can be very noisy. They'll try and do it quietly, but there's no way to do it. Cellophane is just loud. And so sometimes those type of things in an audience can sort of douse the response. Again, Saturday night audiences in a comedy tend to be easy winners because they tend to have had a day off. They tend to have had a little beverage before the show, maybe during the show, and so they tend to be a little looser. Again, sometimes the audience, you win, sometimes you don't understand why. And again, as soon as I tell you that opening nights are always a winner, you're gonna have a loser. There's an adage that a bad preview is a good opening. That's for people who've had bad previews. I'm gonna tell you a good preview is gonna have a good opening. Quality work is quality work, yes? But if you had a bad preview, trust me, you're gonna say, you know what, bad preview, good opening. Because it's a way of encouraging the actors to know, and this is true, no matter how last night went, good, bad, or indifferent, tonight is another chance to do the show all over again from the top, yes? And so you have a chance to improve it and get it right. One of the people you're gonna have to deal with is the house manager. Here's a little video, talk a little bit about what house managers do.
Given the go-ahead to open.
One of the most satisfying things to me is solving problems successfully and making an unhappy patron happy. Hi, my name is Brian Gaynor and I'm a house manager. Well, a house manager is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the theater. We are basically the liaison also between the production and my employer, the Schubert organization. The role of the house manager is also to take care of the audience. It's to make sure that the audience is able to enjoy a Broadway show, and if there are any problems, that you're there to solve it. You know, every department in the theater and in the front of the house basically, is run by a department head or a manager or a treasurer or something. And we're basically there to just tie all the departments together to make sure that that the finished product is that, the audience came, they saw a show, they enjoyed themselves, and they got home and they get out safely. I got started in this business back in January of 1990. I was hired by the Schubert Organization's security department to do plainclothes security at Miss Saigon. I subsequently left Miss Saigon and did some private security work at Phantom. Mr. Schoenfeld, our late chairman of the board, he always spoke to everybody. And I was in the Marine Corps, so I was very neat, very squared away, very professional. And he took a liking to that. And, he would chit-chat and he said to me, what is it you want to do with your life? And I told him that I was interested in managing one of his theaters. And he looked at me, and he looked at me hard, and he says, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "Very." And one thing led to another. And on March the 20th, 1995, I took over the Schubert under the apprentice program of my union at PAM. I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would end up, coming out of the Marine Corps, that I would end up working as a manager on Broadway. I took over in the middle of Crazy for You. It had about a year and a half left on the run. We subsequently had Big the Musical. After Big, we renovated the front of the house. And Chicago moved from the Richard Rodgers to our theater in February of 1997. Then we had Gypsy with Bernadette Peters. And after that, Spamalot came in, and that ran for 4 years. And now we have Memphis, our current production. Our goal is, even though we work for the theater, we're technically support staff for a production. You know, if the production doesn't do well and it leaves, we're unemployed. You know, it's in everyone's best interest, you know, to do their job to make sure this thing that we call Broadway, this magic that we create for the patrons, happens.
It's about 6:30. Everybody's pretty much reporting to work at this time. You know, some of the ushers and the front of house staff is getting in, the bartenders. The stage crew comes in at about 6:30 to do a preset hour. I usually do a walkthrough of the theater just to make sure that all the locks are off of the fire doors.
I have to carry 2 fire licenses. Because I carry the fire licenses, I have to walk around and make sure that all the locks have been taken off the door, all the fire exits are free of any obstructions. I then have to sign a fire log that, funny enough, is a English composition book which technically cannot be tampered with. And I take that very seriously because I have had to evacuate this theater for a fire condition. And we did it successfully. And everyone was safe. And I guess a lot of theater managers have gone through their entire careers, never had to evacuate. It's a scary thing, and it's you know, you become so nervous because you can't mess up. I mean, if I have celebrities or dignitaries, I mean, each one I guess would be, we handle differently. You have stars that come here and they just don't want to be bothered. I mean, we just recently had Michelle Obama and her 2 children and an entourage. And that was handled very, you know, high security, Secret Service, staged her over in the Broadhurst so she wouldn't be in the theater during intermission. So everything was done for the safety of the party and the safety of the First Lady. You know, the energy changes from night to night depending on your audience, depending also on the size of your audience.
Still have 102 out. 801, I'd like the number to be lower, but I'm not quite sure if I'm going to hold the show, you know, for that amount.
I think the cast, you know, really feeds on it. They perform better when the audience is more into the production. Watching an audience evolve over the lifespan of a production is quite an interesting thing. You know, in the beginning you get, and you know, for lack of a better term, your A crowd. You're gonna get your stars, your Tony voters, you know, so you're gonna get, you know, a lot of the VIP and important people in the beginning. And as a production goes on, you know, you're gonna start getting your tourists and your patrons from the tri-state area. And then as a production begins to wind down and you're doing discounts and you're at TKTS, it's just a total different ball game.
This is Ty Lackey. Hello. And he's a soundman, and I'm going to go ahead and tell him that he can tell the production they can go in just about a minute.
In 1 minute?
And you have the house.
All right, thank you.
I think what I love more about the theater is that, you know, you become one big family, you know, and everyone looks out for everybody. You know, we're all in this together. You know, each production that comes in has their own dynamic and it's new and it's interesting, and you know, and I also love to go through the whole production period because I think that's the most interesting part of the theater is just watching it all come together and then watching that first run through and watching that first preview and opening night and everything. I think that's just the most interesting part of the theater to me.
Again, I'm going to give you a list of about 15 different things, specific things, that the house manager tends to be responsible for. Sometimes different people will coordinate with these people on certain things, but just go through the list. First of all, the house manager and the ushers that they are in command of need to check the condition of the auditorium, make sure that everything is the exits are clear of things that have been put in the way, that the temperature's okay, that it's comfortable, that the auditorium has been swept or mopped or vacuumed, whatever needs to happen. The house manager coordinates with the stage manager for when the house is ready to open through the audience. Again, in our theater, because we don't have a grand drape, oftentimes that involves having the actors have checked their props on stage so that everybody's ready for the show to go. And so sometimes that can be a delay. If there's a grand drape, because you can still be on stage, and really with a grand drape, with the well-made grand drape, you can still be on stage making noise, and the audience, the grand drape will muffle it enough usually. But still, you need to have the grand drape down and have your preset cues going. So if there's sound or music going, those things need to be in place before the house opens. Once the house is open, the house manager has complete responsibility until they give the responsibility to the stage manager when the house manager says the show is ready to go. So if there's any emergency, like someone falls down the stairs, or God forbid there's a fire or any of that sort of stuff, that's the house manager's call. Yes. If there's smoke in the arena, or anything you have to deal with as an emergency situation, once the house is open until the show begins, that's the house manager's responsibility. Once the show is running, it's the stage manager's responsibility. And then when you get to intermission, it goes back. It goes back to the house manager, and then once the show begins in the second act or third act, it goes back to the stage manager, yes? And then again, post-show, it becomes the house manager's responsibility to make sure that programs are picked up, that things are cleaned up, but it becomes the house manager's job again to control in case of an emergency at the end, yes? The house manager needs to, again, with the help of the ushers, greet and meet and seat the arriving audience members. You're going to find that house managers have to deal with people who have mobility problems, especially if there are stairs in the auditorium. It may be that the seats have to be taken out in order to have wheelchair seating in some theaters. In our theater, the wheelchair can only go in the first row. So if you have a wheelchair that shows up and the person wants to stay in the wheelchair, they're welcome to do that. And we can remove a couple seats. But again, house managers tend to have ushers to coordinate that thing. But again, as a director, you're standing around. Certainly you can involve yourself in meeting those people, especially opening night. You may even have some sort of opening night reception that you're invited to, and you can, again, glad hand and do good things for the theaters, and even in professional theater. People are going to want to meet you as the director and talk about the show and the production, that sort of thing. You may even have reviewers who, during the preview or during the meet and greet, will try and get little digs so they can use it in their reviews. So again, stay positive, because those things may wind up in the paper if you don't. You have to, if there are any kind of replacements that are in the cast, there are 3 ways that equity says that you have to inform the audience of an understudy going on. You have to do 2 of the 3. One is to put a placard or an announcement in the lobby. The second way is to put little program notes in each program. And the third way is to make an announcement, it can be recorded or live, before the show. Equity says in an equity situation where you have an equity actor who's been replaced for that show, you have to do 2, the theater has to do 2 of those 3 things. And so one of the things that house managers have to be responsible for is A, there's enough programs, and that the ushers have access to those programs, but then B, that if there are any kind of notices of replacements, that the little insert has been placed in all the programs, that sort of thing. So again, the programs are a big bit with house managers. Obviously, the ushers are people that the house manager should instruct as to how to seat people, where the numbers of the stage are. There are some theaters where the numbering system is weird in the sense that you have odd numbers on one side of the stage and even numbers on the other side of the stage. So you may have ticket numbers 102, 104, 106 that are actually seated together on one side of the stage, and 101, 103, 105 that are seated on the other side of the stage. There are crazy ways that seats are numbered in this world. In our theater, again, it's just general admission, so they hand the programs off, and it's first come, first serve kind of thing. But again, ushers need to know as well what your fire procedures might be. Now, as a director, and again, this is sort of a producer, director, stage management call. you might be involved in deciding what happens if there is a fire emergency or any kind of emergency. Let's say there's a tornado that comes through or a hurricane that comes through. How do you handle stopping the show? How do you handle getting the audience in or out, or keeping them there, or what are the plans for action? A lot of theaters already have those in place. For instance, at AUM, we have a planned procedure where in the case of an emergency that's inside the building, the actors meet at the Grove and the audience meets out at the Fountain. If there's an outside activity like a hurricane or tornado, that sort of thing, then we meet in the green room, and the actors meet in the green room and the bathrooms, because those walls are thicker and there are a lot more of them. And again, the audience gets to go to those rooms that are right there next to the theater itself. You want as many people in a smaller room as possible, so the walls can hold you up in case of an emergency like that. But those are standard procedures that we have at AUM, and most theaters have them. But occasionally, depending upon the design of the set, those things may need to be addressed specifically to the play, and you may need to help coordinate or at least advise on how that happens. Another area that you might be needed for information is late seating. If you have audience members that are arriving late, some directors say nobody gets in until intermission. Some directors will say there's a scene break 5 minutes into the show. Nobody should be allowed in until that scene break. Some directors are like, let them in. It all depends on the shape of the theater. Again, it's awful hard in Broadway situations where you paid $300, $500 a ticket to say, I'm sorry, you can't go in. You may get a little bit pushback, and so most Broadway theaters allow late seating people to arrive and get into space, and of course the audience is annoyed, but that's the nature of late seating. But again, as a director, you may have an opinion, and you may be asked what your late seating policy is. But again, the ushers ultimately take care of that, and the house manager is responsible for that. House managers also need to make sure the restrooms have enough toilet paper, they're clean, that the toilets are working, that anything that needs to be taken care of, if things are overflowing or need mops, they need to make sure the janitorial staff is aware of that, so they typically handle that type of thing. Any kind of audience delay, like late buses or traffic jams, accidents that are on the highway, again, the house managers should maintain sort of an eye and ear for those sort of things, so that let's say you have a bus that's going to be 10 minutes late, the house manager can request a hold with the stage management. And again, depending on if you've got a house of 150 people and 40 people on the bus, and they're all going to show up 10 minutes late, as a director, I would say hold. If you've got a house of 3,000 people and 40 people are going to show up 10 minutes late, we got 2,600 people waiting, whatever it is. So I would say go. So a lot of times it depends on what type of theater it is and that sort of thing as well. Once you've gotten the audience seated, the house manager is responsible to make sure any kind of access doors are closed, that any kind of lighting that is controlled by the house management, aisle lights, that sort of thing, have been turned off or dimmed down, whatever the answer is. Again, the curtain speech is something that is often coordinated with the director. I would say even on opening night, it may be if you're in town, that the producer may ask you to make the curtain speech, thanking your cast and crew, and going out and welcoming the audience to the show, informing them to turn their cell phones off and showing them where the exits are in case of emergency, and explaining, if there's an intermission or where the bathrooms are, when they'll get a break, that sort of thing, are things that typically go into a curtain speech. If you can also, again, as a director, have decided that you want to have a live speech every night, and oftentimes the house manager, if the producer's not around, the house manager winds up being the person giving that curtain speech. It's also, again, a time when you can announce any kind of replacements. It also, let's talk about this. In the program, spend 2 seconds on this. For instance, my last name is Winkleman. I would say half the times I've done a show, people have misspelled it. I just get very accustomed to people misspelling my name. Jacqueline, I know you know who you are. I apologize because I still can't spell your name. But there are just people who, because their name is difficult to spell, sort of have become accustomed to it being misspelled in programs. But when the program comes out, there's going to be people who get very upset because their name may be misspelled, or they may be miscredited somehow, or there may be something that has happened in the printing process that's going to upset somebody. So again, as a director, when those programs come out, or when the sheet comes through, when the proof comes through, I would make sure that everyone has read and initialed their own bio at least. 2 seconds on proofreading. I have found that anytime you don't have time to proofread something, there's something wrong with it. Anytime you got all day to proofread something, there's nothing wrong with it. So if you have been given a poster, a program, a postcard, whatever to proofread, take the time to stop and proofread it. We once had a show that for whatever reason, the second Thursday show wasn't listed as among the dates, and nobody caught it. So we literally were going around and putting a sticker on the posters. All the posters we put up around campus said an added Thursday night special. Well, guess what? That show was sold out because we go around and put this special added performance. So, if you really want somebody to come to a show, that might be a way, at least in the past it's worked for us, to find a way to get an audience on a particular night. Again, if the house opens at intermission, the house manager is back in charge. Times of intermission, they time the intermission, and then there's a couple ways usually to inform the audience that the play is about to begin again. One is usually to blink the lights. You may also have theaters that ring a bell, ding a dong, whatever it is. But the house manager is responsible for taking the time of the intermission. And a lot of times intermissions will be, if you have 2 intermissions, if you have 3-act play, for instance, you may have a 15-minute intermission and then a 10-minute intermission, or you may have a 10-minute intermission and a 5-minute intermission, or a 15-minute intermission and a 5-minute intermission. But again, a lot of times, just like the late bus at the beginning, a lot of times, even though you want to have a 5-minute intermission, if the line in the men's room is long, you might have to hold. And so the house manager, again, is responsible for coordinating with the stage manager those type of things. As a director, it drives you nuts because it's just time ticking off the clock, which is being wasted for the show. Again, most shows want to run clean, right? If you can. The next thing, they clear with the stage manager at the end of intermission, get the stage manager to run the show again. Any kind of cell phones or audience members who have babies, any kind of interruption in the audience, if you have people taking photographs in an audience, and again, with this thing nowadays, that becomes really difficult to see sometimes. But again, copyright laws being what they are, it's illegal to tape or film live performances, especially in a professional situation. But even with an amateur situation, you have copyright laws that say that, the theater had to pay for permission to perform that play. And so having somebody film it and then put it on YouTube or something is a copyright violation. So even though it's amateur actors and amateur designers, it's still an illegal act to film a live performance that has been copyrighted, yes? And so the state, anytime a thing that's happening in the audience like that, the house manager deals with. And again, ushers are there to help them deal with it. If you have disruptive audience members, that sort of thing, you need to get that taken care of. Any kind of court at the end of the stage, into the play, securing the theater, locking things up, again, picking up programs that have been left in the aisles, getting gum off the bottom of seats, whatever has been done, vacuuming again at the end of the show or the audience. And again, some theaters have a tradition to do it after the show, some do it during the day. It's 6 one, half dozen the other as far as I'm concerned, as far as when that happens. But that's the house manager's responsibilities. And again, it's just as a director, because the house manager is there and you are welcoming, can help to greet and meet the audience. Sometimes they will encourage you to do so because, again, with the 15 minutes that they're just waiting around for the show to start, oftentimes it's nice to have said, oh, I met the house manager. If you have any replacements in the cast, again, it's up to you if you're around, if you want to hold rehearsals for understudies or for swings or for those type of people. We've talked about those people in the past. Once the show's in production, if you're around, you might call those. Again, a lot of times you give responsibility to the stage manager or to the dance captain to hold those type of rehearsals. If you're around until strike, the strike of a show is when you take it all down. Again, we're going to talk about in a couple weeks touring, and that's a whole different type of thing. But oftentimes when you've done a show, you may have borrowed some props, you may have borrowed some furniture pieces, you may have borrowed some costumes. Those things need to be returned so that those people you can go back to and say, can we borrow something the next time? You want to have a good reputation in the community as a theater company, and so as a director, oftentimes it's not, and sometimes it's your stuff that they borrow because you know your stuff. So getting those things back in a timely and efficient manner, and again, having them polished or shined or whatever it needs to be done, washed, dry cleaned for clothes, that sort of thing. It's a nice touch to help encourage people to loan things to you in the future. If it's something that's been built or bought by the theater company, you need to find a way to put it in storage. If it's something that has been, that is trash, it needs to be, you need to define what trash is, because again, a lot of, theaters don't tend to have a lot of extra storage space just to keep stuff. Now, if, again, in a couple weeks we'll talk about competitions, but if it's a show that it has a possibility to compete in a competition, it may be that you have a certain space that everything gets put into. And as a director, you can help organize and make sure that there are the right kind of crates, the right kind of boxes, the right kind of facilities available to have those things separated for you, so in case that sort of thing happens. Cool. All right, you've got next week is we've got your prompt script due for your final project. Again, your final project needs to be a prompt script for a play other than Crimes of the Heart. You need to do a character scene breakdown of whatever that play is. Just go through the whole play and do how many characters in which scene, that sort of thing. You also need to have gone through and done a play analysis, answer those 7 questions about the time of day, the moods, the atmospheres, all those things that you did for both Crimes of the Heart and for Kraft's Last Tape at the beginning of the semester. So analysis, a character scene breakdown, and your prompt script. And again, you can certainly you don't have to create like a phone list. Just put a piece of paper that says phone list, or get the copy of the phone list that I handed out as an example. Just put it in the prompt script so I know that you know where a phone list goes, and make sure that everything is tabbed, including the intermissions and that sort of thing for the script itself. Yes, but that's all due next week when your final project is due, and then I'm also going to post the review sheet for your exam number 2, and if you're in class today, I'll hand a copy of that out to you. Cool. Otherwise, hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next week.